Yes, I unmuted myself.
Ah, perfect. Okay, I just was thinking that you're on mute. Excellent. So I'll hand the stage to you.
Okay, thank you very much for attending this session. I think I didn't know whether Jenny said Apex best practices or bad practices. The name is very close, of course, but in fact, this is Apex bad practices. Because usually you got all these best practices sessions, and I don't claim to have the best solution for each and everything, but I can tell you something about bad practices that I've seen in the past, and I've already did some of these myself. So a little bit about myself. My name is Roel Hartman. I'm a director at my own company, Apex Consulting. An Oracle ACE director, also an Oracle Groundbreaker ambassador, and a director at OD-Tux. So I'm wearing this nice shirt now. Unfortunately, we had to announce yesterday that we have to cancel Case Scope 20 at the end of June in Boston due to the fact that we're all sitting at home. So even things that are 3 months out, we have to ready to cancel it. But I hope to see you in 21 in Nashville, which will also be an awesome event. So a little bit about myself. I'm a little bit about some bragging. So what I'm doing when I'm not working, I'm quite trying to run. So I don't know the camera if you can see it, but there are some medals right behind me. So these are all from marathons and half marathons. So I did 7 marathons. I was planning to do another one next week or the week after, but again, canceled, of course, and even the next half marathon in June is also canceled. But meanwhile, I try to keep my condition in the right by just running. And the advantage of working from home all the time is that you don't spend time in traffic. So I'll spend that time running through the woods here anyway. Of course, in isolation, because I don't see anyone there. So another little ad before we get started about the Oracle ACE program. As you might know, there are 3 different levels: ACE Director, Oracle ACE, and ACE Associate. If you want to be an Oracle ACE, or you know someone who needs to be an Oracle ACE, you can go to that link that's on the bottom, acenomination.oracle.com, which is a nice Apex application, and just fill in the form, and your application will be evaluated. So about making mistakes. Making mistakes is not a bad thing. Apparently, if you don't make any mistake at all, you don't progress, you don't try anything. So the best way the only excuse if you're making mistakes, if you don't learn from it, then it's just plain stupid. So explore, make mistakes, and learn from it. That's the best way of doing it. So of course you can do it all by yourself, but you can also try to learn from other people's mistakes. And that's why I asked around on Twitter this question. For an upcoming presentation with Apex best practices, I'm crowdsourcing for examples. So if you have an example, let me know, anonymous. And it doesn't have to be your mistake. You can blame anyone. I don't care. And I sent out this tweet, and I got quite some reactions. So let's go over them. So these are all the reactions I got from that single tweet from all the kind of people you might know. Scott Wesley is from Australia. Paul Jones from the UK. Catherine, I don't know where she's from. Stephanie Martin from Canada. Pierre has some examples. Karen, Rich Keegan, that's another one of my answers. Tobias, and the list goes on and on and on. So lots of people have ideas about making mistakes. So let's go over them one by one. We only have 45 minutes, so let's not do that. Let's split them into different groups to group them together. So the first thing is, the first group of bad practices is talking about getting organized. Where do you put your stuff? How do you get your stuff organized? The second one is, where's your code? Where should your code be? And that's especially aimed at PL/SQL code. And then the third one is, what do we do with JavaScript? Is there anything special with that? And then there is a last group for everything that didn't fit in one of the first three. So the first thing, getting organized. So what's important about getting organized? Naming stuff is important. Naming is documentation. So if you're using the wrong names for anything in your application, it can be pages, can be page items, can be dynamic actions, can be anything. If you're using it wrong, you're creating confusion and a maintenance nightmare to happen. So for instance, if you stick to the defaults of Apex by creating new page items, you get something like this: P1 new, P1 new 1, P1 new 1, 1, etc., etc. So usually you should adhere to the suggested and standard naming conventions, but not in this case. So if you stick in it in this place, then nobody will understand what you're doing. You probably won't even understand what you're doing the next day, because it doesn't make any sense at all. You don't want to end up with something that looks like this, where a region is called new, and items are called new, and a dynamic action called new. So everything is brand new and might work as a charm, but maintenance is just a bloody nightmare. So if, for instance, if you have something like this, this is way better. So you got P1 mno, that's something with an mno, and a dynamic action that says something like, when mno changes, do whatever. Alas, the dynamics actions itself don't have a very prescriptive name either, like show or show is a so it does show something that says something, but especially the execute PL/SQL code and execute JavaScript code don't say anything. It has been mentioned in the past that it might implement something meaningful here, so that you can give these steps a meaningful name, and that would be very helpful. But now, if you have something like this, you have to go into each and every step to see what's actually happening right there. So another thing about naming. So some people said, Stephanie in this case, said renaming page items from P6 name to name. So some people, apparently, she encountered in an application, says, I got a name in my application, P6 name, and page item. I don't like that for one reason or another. And I just renaming that thing to name. In this case, you should adhere to the standards. Maybe you think that P6 name, I don't like it, but I have no clue why they renamed something like this. Probably, I'm just guessing, is that they want to refer to the value of P6 name in another page. So if you need a page item value on another page, what are your options? So usually there's a very interactive session. So like people in the audience, you just say something, but I'm not waiting for that right now. So you can just think about what you think are the options. So usually you can use an application item. So in this case, you can have the name as an application item, like mno name, and you can use it everywhere. Or you can use a value on page 0, the global page. Or you can just use P1mno, because if P1mno has a value, you can just reference it on each and every page, unless page 1 gets cleared again. So there's no real use case to rename P1mno or P6mno in the example to just mno or mname, because it doesn't make any sense. Although there is a big difference between application item and a global page item. So the first, number 1 and 2 on this list, there is a big difference. And the difference is that an application item is never rendered on a page. That's something that sticks into memory in the database. It's not on your page, while P0M now might be on your page. It doesn't have to be, but it can be on your page if the conditions for rendering the region where it's in and for rendering the item is met. So that's a difference. So P0M now you can reference in, for instance, in JavaScript. An application item, you can't reference that in JavaScript. Scott Wesley had another brilliant idea. Don't accidentally name static IDs the same as lowercase version of page items. I've never done that. So because he's saying that, I doubt it. He probably did do that because I don't know why you should even think of that. So, but what will happen if you do something like that? So, and whether it's lowercase or version or uppercase version doesn't really matter. Because if you have the same thing, if you give them the same name, the same static IDs, then you're already in trouble. So let's look at what he's trying to do. So in this case, we got an item P1M now and a region with a static ID P1M now. Yeah. So if you have something like this, it's a piece of JavaScript, he's saying, give me the element P1M now, the element with ID P1M now. So what will it return? In this case, because you're using the hashtag, so the ID, jQuery returns the first thing that it encounters in your DOM, in your on your page. And in this case, that's the static ID of your region. So you get your region back. So let's be smarter. Say, give me, I'm not using jQuery, I'm using Apex item, and just say Apex item P1M now, give me that. So I'm asking for an item, I should get an item, all right? Wrong. You don't get the item back, but you still get the same element back, and that's the region. For instance, in this example, Apex item P1M now, and it returns the div P1M now, which is a region. Because Apex item is just a wrapper, a fancy wrapper around the jQuery function anyway. So don't ever mess with those static IDs. So, and I created this presentation, I already gave it once or twice. And then I saw this tweet of Dennis, Kubicek from Germany. And he says, to the unknown programmer who has assigned the same static ID to all the buttons on the page, etc. Do mankind a favor and stop what you're doing. So imagine a page with multiple buttons, they got the same static ID. So what will happen if you define dynamic actions? Dynamic actions will fire on a static ID. Then because they are in a certain order, they will only fire on the first button that is encountered. So all dynamic actions will be attached to the first button on your page. And I can imagine how someone gets here, because probably the programmer had created the first button, and the first dynamic action said, hey, this is working fine. I need more of those. I just copy these buttons, including the static ID. And it went all downhill from there. So a little more about organizing your application. So divide and conquer. You can have a few applications with lots of pages. So for instance, on one of my customers has the whole application is, and I have to say it's 3 applications, but 2 of them are just 1 or 2 pages because they're very specific, and the other one is 350 or maybe even 400 pages. So in fact, it's just 1 application, it's a lot of pages. Or you can have the opposite. You can have a lot of applications with a few pages. which is also the opposite. There's also not the best way to do it, because splitting it up in lots of applications has some drawbacks as well. For instance, if you're using a page zero or a global page approach, that thing is not shared over applications. So if you're maintaining that on, make some changes on application A, you have to do it on B, C, and D, etc. again. So you have to, everything you do on page zero, you have to replicate everything. The same applies to some of the shared components. The shared component says they're shared, but it doesn't mean they can be shared by definition over applications. So some of them can, but some of them can't. For instance, lists is a very good example. They stick to within one application. So you can work around it, especially for lists. You probably make them dynamic anyway and derive them from the database, and then you're good to go. But if you're defining static lists and you want to share them over applications, you just have to recreate it again. And everything you recreate, it's a maintenance nightmare anyway. So if you want to share your stuff over applications, then something like this is the way to go. First, you create a master application, and the master application holds everything that can be shared over applications. And the first application you create is a seed application. And within the seed application, all the subscriptions to the master are in place. So everything that can be shared over applications are shared in the seed application as well. For instance, plugins, themes, templates, and all those kind of things, authorization schemes, authentication schemes. They're all defined in the master and are subscribed by the seed application. And when you start building your application, you're just copying the seed application to application 1, application 2, application 3, etc. And because you're copying that seed application, the subscription is already in place. You don't have to do that over and over again. So that's a good thing to know. And if you're making some changes in the master, you can just push them out to all your applications. So if you have a new version of a plugin, you just install it in the master and push that out to all the applications. You don't have to. You can also install it in the master and pull that, for instance, only from application 2 because you want to test it first and push it out later. But there are multiple options. But this is the best way and easiest way to maintain a uniform look and feel and as less code as you need it in your applications. So what things can be shared over an application is everything is everything that's green in here. So there are lots of red crosses. So you've got lots of shared components, but they don't work in the subscription model. So application processes, application computations, settings, etc. Are not available in a subscription setting. So you can't define them in the master and use them over applications saying themes and templates, etc. Web source modules, as I said, authentication, authorization schemes, you can use them everywhere. So I already said about page 0, every application has its own page 0. So you cannot share objects on that page between applications. So be smart in dividing your big application, your huge application, into submodules. Every application should have maybe at least something like 25 to 40 pages. That's a decent line, decent number. So you can just deploy that application, that part of your application, that module, without breaking the rest of your application. Because if you're deploying a 350-page application all the time, you might break more than you were expecting to. And subscribing. So we already said we're going to subscribe to this stuff in our master application, but in the master application, we're also subscribing to the universal theme. The universal theme is the big thing in Oracle Apex that makes the application look and feel as it looks as it does. It makes it responsive. It gives you nice colors, etc. And the whole look and feel is based on that. However, if you think, I need to change to the template, and I can only change that template by unsubscribing Universal Theme, that's the wrong way to do it, because then you're basically cut off from any new feature that might be introduced in Apex 20.1, 20.2, etc. Because lots of new features needs the new version of the Universal Theme as well. So unsubscribing from the Universal Theme is a very bad idea. If you do need to change to a template, you need a specific template, then just copy an existing one and make changes in there. And when you get a newer version of the Universal Theme, then you have to match the version, the version you copied with the version you changed and see what the difference are. Sometimes there are no difference at all, so you can just say, oh, this one is also working for the new version of the Universal Theme. Sometimes you have to make some changes in, for instance, in classes, or maybe in the structure, in the HTML structure. So where do you put your stuff? Is it in your place or is it mine place? So one thing you have to watch out for, don't put your files in Apex directories. Because on upgrades, you will probably forget them, and then they will be gone, like forever. For instance, on this side, so this is the Apex directory where all the code is in there, all the installation code, but also all CSS files, all the JavaScript files. And there is a directory that says my code, and in my code I got some stuff about NHR, Depilot, WebSockets, etc. And a super LOV.js file and CSS file. So. And I have to admit, this was my setup. So until I upgraded this version to a higher version, and then you just copy the whole images directory over the old one, and then that my code directory is gone. But luckily, I'm on a Mac, so I can get back to my old my code directory and get it back, but don't put it in the same place, put it somewhere else. For instance, put it on a higher level. In this case, you see it's so the Apex 18.2 and Apex 19.1 directories you see here, that's where Apex lives. And I put my own code on the same level somewhere, but you can put it anywhere where you can reference that in your web server. For instance, so I usually do it because it's so easy. I can put it in this Apex directory and can just reference it with the images hashtag images directory directive, and otherwise I have to do something really complicated. But not really. You can just say, I'm going to map my code, web/my code, to any directory on my file system. In this case, my code.js, my JS file. So it's better to have more additional mappings to your own stuff and keep everything out of the Apex directories anyway. So that was all about getting organized. So the next stuff is, dude, where's my code? So this is what people have to say. People who write codes in Apex is bad practice. Using PL/SQL expressions for conditions. I think Peter just mentioned something like that. Inline PL/SQL code is a bad practice according to Martin. But where can you put your PL/SQL code? Think about it. How many places do you know where in Apex where you can put PL/SQL code? Let's see if you got the same list as I have here. One obvious one is processes. You can have initialization before header processes or just submit processes. In the region source can be a PL/SQL. Item source can have PL/SQL. A condition can have PL/SQL, of course. Read-only condition as well. Item default can have a PL SQL. Dynamic action can have PL SQL in it because it's just an AJAX call. And a validation can have a PL SQL call. And there might be one or two more places where you can put PL SQL, so you can have it everywhere. But the main question is, where should you put your PL SQL? And we all know the answer, but we don't do it all the time, because the answer is, of course, in the database. All PL SQL should go in the database in packages, procedures, functions. And no, in general, let's just say, there should be no PL SQL at all, apart from a call to that function or procedure in Apex, but the rest should all be in a database. And why is that? Because it's reusable when it's in a database. Everything that you put in a PL SQL block in Apex is not reusable. You have to code it over and over again. And if it's just a package function, you can use it everywhere. It's testable. It's easier to test a PL SQL function or PL SQL procedure that's in the database than a PL SQL block that's in Apex, because that's just a part of an application. And you can simply write unit tests against everything that PL SQL that's in the database. It's compiled, of course, so it's a little bit faster. And because it's compiled, you have dependencies. So if you drop a column from a view or drop a column from a table, you immediately see which PL SQL functions or packages or procedures will become invalid, and it will fix it. If you do the same thing and your PL SQL is in Apex, you don't notice anything until your user touches that page and get a nasty error. So everything in the database is always a very smart move. So some more remarks regarding PL SQL that people say. You say referencing page items in database views, said Stephanie. I think that's a bad idea. And I would say referencing page items in view is not necessarily wrong, but use it wisely. So there are two things about to say that if you're referencing page items in database views, of course, you can't reuse that view in multiple places, because it's referencing, for instance, something in page 1 and you're running on page 6. So you have to be careful about that. But usually the worries is about this kind of thing. If you do a select star from my big table, a field is fee function p2m now. Then you're screwed, because this fee function will be executed for each and every row in your table, and it have context switching all over. So this will be very, very slow. You can solve this a bit by using a scalar subquery and just say where field is and then select fee from dual, because in this case, if you do it like this, that fee function is only executed once and not for each and every row. So this is way faster. I think it's the other way with the with clause is more elegant. So because it's more explicit what this p2m is. It's a parameter. So you can have with parameters select whatever from dual. So we select the value from my big table and from param and reference it in there. And sometimes you need to use this materialize hint to make it an actual table in the database, a temporary table. And this is usually also the fastest solution if you're using Apex items in your views. So other things people came about having many items based on a similar SQL query returning a single value. So for instance, you got, in this case, what Catherine meant is I have like 10 values from the same table, and I use a computation item to fill that. So for each and every item, just say select emp now from emp where blah blah blah, select ename from emp, etc. So these are all like 10 queries accessing the same table, even accessing the same record in the table. If you're doing something like this, that's not the way to do it. Just to write a process and name each and every page item in that process and not use a computation for that. So get them all in one go, because that will be a little bit faster. It will be just one query only. Scott, he says, if you got data in your page, you should always use a toDate function. Now let's explore that a little bit, because do we need a format mask, for instance, to do so? Because just toDate, or do we need a format mask for toDate? If you're looking at the format mask, there's a way, the way to set it global on your globalization is on application level is the application date format. So in this case, I set a kind of weird date format, month, year, date. That's even weirder than the American format. So when is this used, this application date format? You know that, and you can spot that if you're running your page in debug mode. So this is the output from a debug mode, and on every render, when you submit, and every AJAX call, you will see something like this, like this setting NLS date format to that application date format. So every toDate you're doing in your code in one of these sessions will use this NLS date format. So you don't need to specify anything else. Especially don't specify the same thing anywhere else. So this is what you see in session state, for instance, if you're using something like that. So if you have your application date format, this is the one on the upper left, set to month, year, date. You can specify a different format on any item, but only if that's explicitly different than the application date format. Because if you're reusing the application date format over and over again everywhere, and your application date format might change for one reason or another, then you have to make lots of changes everywhere. So if you're referencing application date format, you can also use the app date format, your substitution string, which is more dynamic, of course. So use only your format masks in the appearance and in your PL/SQL code if you explicitly know that the value entered has a different format than the standard one. So that's about V1 dates. So another bad thing is using session in SQL, session substitution string. So why is that a bad idea? Because each and every user has a different session, so each and every SQL statement is different. So if you're using the same SQL statement and it says select building up some kind of URL using the session substitution string, they'll all be different and they can't be shared. So your shared pool will get bigger and bigger. And that means that things will fall out your shared pool, can be reused, have to pass, has to be parsed again, so your application will get slower in the end. Beware of undocumented features. Of course, in PL/SQL there are also undocumented features, because what will happen, you will get hit. So for instance, there's a blog out there somewhere from 2016, and it says, if you want to prevent the row-based search in a report, so usually when a user starts up an Apex report, it gets the first 50 rows, but if your table is really big, the user is not interested in those first 50 rows at all. So you did a query and you transported something over the network, which the user doesn't want to see. So what we did in this case is that you have to use some kind of search criterion, search condition, and then we will execute a query. So we discovered that there were two things used for entering a condition: Apex WS expression 1 and Apex WS search string 1. So we just say in the query, on each and every query where we wanted that, saying these values, either one of these values should not be nil. So, and then Apex 18 came along. So Apex 18, they didn't use those two values, because they were undocumented. They could change that. They used one other one, Apex $F1. The big advantages are reports were blazingly fast, but the downside is they didn't return anything at all. So now we had to rewrite our code, our fancy code, to saying Apex $F1 should be nil. So be aware of all these undocumented features. And always check the release notes on the new version. I think that's something that Peter also mentioned. So that's about the code. So what about the JavaScript stuff? So Marco has something said about jQuery. You shouldn't use jQuery. Don't using the Oracle Apex API, but use something else. Hiding little snippets of JavaScript all over the place. That's a bad idea error. So just like we did with SQL, where can you put your JavaScript code? So remember your applications, where did you put JavaScript? So the easiest one, of course, is in the JavaScript section of a page. That's not a weird thing, weird position, because it says what the title is very descriptive. It's more or less allowed to have JavaScript in there. In the page header and footer, usually because in the old days there was no JavaScript section, so we used the page header or the page footer to put our JavaScript in there with a JavaScript tag even. So you can still use that. You can also put it in the region header and footer. That's getting nastier and nastier from here, of course. You can also use the item pre and post text to put JavaScript in there because it's just HTML. So if you're using the script tags, you can put JavaScript in there. You will make your coworkers or your successors very happy because they have to search all the application and find code on the weirdest places. Your URL target can be JavaScript. You can just say URL target, JavaScript, semicolon, and then some kind of JavaScript. The dynamic action in the when and in the condition, you can have JavaScript in there. And of course, the execute JavaScript code in dynamic actions. And nowadays, you got all those JavaScript initialization code for interactive grid and for the calendar, etc. So there are even more places right now. So again, the question is, where should you put your JavaScript code? So what's the best place to put it? The first thing is, it should be in a file, either on your network or a static application file, and reference it in the user interface details. Or if it's not reference it in a lot of places, a lot of pages, just reference it on your page if it's more specific to a page. So put your JavaScript in a file. And it's also easier to maintain, and especially put it on a network. You can also put it into Git and see some version control out of it. In a plugin is also a good place to put JavaScript in there, in the JavaScript file, in a plugin or in the plugin itself, because it's the most important thing is just stored on one place only. So my rule in general is that I don't want to see any JavaScript anywhere else. So usually we have some kind of check and it says, show me all the places where the JavaScript text is more than so many, like 25 characters. And and if someone has sinned against that rule, then you have to write a plugin for it or put it somewhere in the file. But of course, it's more in a guideline than an actual rule, but you have to adhere to it anyway. So how should you code your JavaScript? What should you use? Should you use $ and then hashtag P1M which is jQuery? Or should you use Apex item P1M What's the difference? Is it the same thing or is it not the same thing? So let's see. If I'm using the jQuery solution, just P1M I get the jQuery object back. It looks like this. If I'm using the same P1M and put it in Apex item, so Apex item P1M I get this. So this is absolutely not the same thing. There's a totally different result sets. So if you're just interested in the value, what should you use then? The first one, $V P1M now, or Apex item P1M now get value. Think about it. So, but this is a trick question because the first one doesn't work because the hashtag is not used in the $V. So dollar is jQuery, dollar and then hashtag P1M now. $V is an Apex function, so it doesn't need the hashtag for the ID. $V P1M now is good enough. So P1M now, $V P1M now, or Apex item P1M now. Is it the same thing or is it different? If you just go to the console and enter $V and then you say, well, what's the return? What does it do? So it says, and most PL/SQL developers already say, this is too complicated for me, but you might recognize Apex item, get value. Okay, that's the same as we had before. And then it says something about Apex jQuery is array, join semicolon B. Then a lot of people will just say, what the heck? Let's see what it returns. Especially if it can be multiple values, because that's the difference. So $V from P1 checkbox can be B semicolon C. So that's what the top thing says. If it is an array, then concatenate it with a semicolon. So $V is P1 checkbox. And if I use Apex item P1 checkbox, I get an array. So there's a subtle difference between Apex item, get value, and $V from an item. So you have to be aware of that. It's not the same. If it's just a single value, it is the same, but if it's multiple values, there's a difference. If you want exactly the same thing, then there's also another very unknown feature. Starts from $V, there's $V2, which returns also an array. And if you look at $V2, it's just a shortcut version of Apex item get value, so it's exactly the same. Know all your Apex JavaScript APIs, look at them. But beware of undocumented features. So people that have been around for a while probably know JReport, because that's why what we use for generating a partial page rendering. HTML-DB get, that was the old AJAX function. And a lot of stuff in the interactive grid. There's also lots of them nowadays is documented, but there's also still lots of things that are not documented. And when we upgrade to 18.2 a couple of months ago, the things that broke were all undocumented or unsupported features. You also have to watch your plugins, because especially the plugins you didn't create by yourself. There might be code in there that you don't even understand, but that's dependent on certain things. So beware of undocumented JavaScript features, but even beware of documented features. So what the heck? Why should I beware of documented features? Because they go away. So this is deprecated JavaScript functions in 19.1. There are a lot of them. They are all deprecated. So even when they are okay in the past, they're not okay anymore in 19.1, and especially the first ones, open model, closed model. So lots of JavaScript, lots of Apex developers have used that one. So be aware, that's not the way to go forward. So how could you solve something like that? Luckily, we implemented my rule. It said no JavaScript anywhere, not even supported ones. So we created a plugin for opening a model, and it looks like this. And we're using that everywhere. So it looks an open model plugin for showing some kind of region. And when we notice that something is not supported anymore, you just have to change that one plugin from open model plugin to Apex Team Open Region, and the same thing. So that was the only change we had to make. Had to make for being up to date again. By the way, nowadays there is an open region. You don't need a plugin anymore because it's just a standard function nowadays in 19.1. So just a few things about the rest of the stuff. Dynamic actions are cool. Everyone's using dynamic actions are cool, but be aware. Every dynamic action that contains SQL or PL SQL is an AJAX call. So that might, if you have too many of them, it might hurt your performance. So page processes, computations, I think that's also what Peter says. If you can get, you don't need an AJAX call, you can use it in the page processor computation, and it's just one round trip to the server instead of many. The more you reduce the number of AJAX calls hitting your server, the better it is. So another thing, if the data on your page is like dirty, like out of date, and not reflecting the database state anymore, either though the change you made yourself or the changes someone else made, you want to refresh. So what did we do in the old ways? We did a page refresh, which is, it's not, it's too intrusive because the whole page gets refreshed, etc. So then we did a region refresh. You can do a region refresh. And even that can be irritating, especially if you make some changes or you have navigated to page 3 of some kind of report and you refresh that region and then you're back to page 1. And that's not what you want. The cool thing now in the interactive Git, you can do a row refresh. And that's even a way better way of refreshing your data. So for instance, if you're making some changes in interactive grid by and changing data in an inline dialog, then you can use a row refresh when you close that dialog to reflect the changes. So this is just for some code in the slide for a plugin that does the same thing. Just fetch the new record just from the get selected record. So as you see at the bottom ones, from the grid, get the selected records and fetch those records again. It does just a quick call to the database for only, usually that one record that you have selected, so it's blazingly fast. So what have we done? We talked about getting organized, talked about where's my code, what about JavaScript, and how the rest of the world. So talking about mistakes, a person who has never made a mistake, never tried something new. So don't be afraid of making mistakes. Try something new. Thank you for your attention. And let's see if there's still some time. We still have some time, and if there's something in the Q&A that I can.
Still some time, and there's still questions in the Q&A. We left most of them open for you. Yes.
No, thank you very much. You couldn't answer them yourself. So one of the.
Not really, no.
Ah, come on. That's someone is saying what's wrong with good old native JS like get element by name, get element by ID. More or less, we know what we program. Yeah, that's true, but it's a long way. And I like to type it's shorter, so I like to use jQuery anyway because it hides the complexity and it resolves all the browser dependent features. Paolo was asking, you said to generate apps from seeds, but when you update the child app, you replace it in its entirety, how to keep changes to other apps. So I think he meant that if you update the seed app, how do I change the other ones as well? If that changes, if that's a change that requires a new subscription, then you have to use that subscription, add that subscription each and every application. So that's why your seed app must already be well thought. Think ahead what you need. And usually you don't build like 5, 6 applications in parallel. You just start with one and then maybe another one next to it. And after a while, you know what's been shared all over the place. And yeah, then the $1,000,000 question, how does Apex cooperate with version control systems like Git? How to include Apex application deploy in a CI/CD pipeline? And that's a question that's been asked, I don't know, for years and years and years. Since 1 year, about 1 year. There is someone in the Apex development team that's his only focus is this Git, or let's say version control. So there are ways to do it. Of course, you can deploy it, but if you're talking about merging stuff and seeing differences, because the file that Apex creates to deploy an application is just a SQL file full of IDs and quite unreadable for a human. You can see. So if you're using Git and you're pushing it there, you can see the difference, but you don't know what the difference is, and you can't do a merge. So that's the downside. But we will see what will be introduced in 20.2. There is probably something on the statement of direction. I haven't looked at it recently, but if you're looking at going to apex.oracle.com/SOD, I think that's a shortcut. Might be something about Git. So, any more questions? JavaScript on DA. Richards asks, JavaScript and DA, actually JavaScript section, will it create an issue? It doesn't create an issue if you're using JavaScript there, but be very smart in using in the code you put there. So no long lines of JavaScript, just call a JavaScript function you created somewhere else. And I would even prefer not to use it at all, but create a plugin. Can be a very simple plugin that does that piece of JavaScript, because it's very hard to imagine that you only need it on one page only. Someone says, can you not place the JavaScript in the database? Call the function with JavaScript from PL/SQL. Yeah, that's you can put JavaScript in the database, and you can generate it JavaScript from within PL/SQL. And that's exactly what Apex does it by herself in some smaller places, but usually JavaScript is stored in separate files because of maintainability. You can do it, but especially it should not require another round trip, because that's not the best way to do it. So does jQuery offer better performance in Apex? To call the JavaScript better performance than what is the question? But jQuery is not faster or smarter than just plain old JavaScript or jQuery. So I don't know what the comparison is for this question. So, what's the best architecture to build ERP modules using Apex development? Now that's especially the ones that I talked about the master application and several sub-applications. So these can all be modules, and you're sharing the stuff over modules in the master application. You can have global items like global application items, as Peter also explained. So you definitely need multiple applications. You can share the login information by sharing the cookie, and so all your modules act just as one. And another question: it runs on apex.oracle.com, but it does not run on my environment 18.2. Yeah, okay, but apex.oracle.com is nowadays 20.1, so it's some version by it. I don't know what's run or what's not run. So now I think we're through our Q&A questions. So thank you for your attention, and Dimitri will be on in 5 minutes. So hope you enjoyed that. Thank you.